up, don't fuck yourself. Don't fuck up, don't fuck yourself. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Rude Cooking School Podcast. I'm your host, John Hauser III, and welcome to what I'm hoping will be the start of a beautiful friendship between me, you, and really fucked up stories about food. We've had this love affair with crazy stories at the end of some of the podcasts, but I want to just take this third week. As you know, we do a full episode and then a food news. And then the third week is usually revolving around interviews or whatever. And I want to start adding, the old movie review things or movie days, and having friends in to talk about that, or this, which would be like a crazy story from history about like a really fucked up thing that happened involving food. And as you already know, because you've read the title of the episode, it's about the Great London Beer Flood, which is it's a horrible, terrible story, but absolutely fascinating. And I've literally now had this on my phone for about 3 years. I've been trying to get to this. You know how you have like 8,000 windows, like tabs open on your phone? This was like tab number 3, like all the way back at the beginning of when I got my phone a while ago. Actually, no, it went through a phone before that, but I've been fascinated by this story. I read it every now and then, and it's horrifying and just weird as shit. And it's a crazy combination of like bad regulation, bad timing, laziness, people not giving a fuck, classism, sort of, the way that the English would look at the Irish, how the rich would look at the poor, how the ruling class would look at the workers. And it's really weird. And it's also sort of a hinge point where like afterwards people were like, oh, okay, we need to start thinking better about this sort of situation. So, I'm gonna go through the story. It's gonna be a short one. These are gonna be shorter. They're not gonna be 2 hours. They're not gonna be an hour and a half. I'm gonna try to keep these short and sweet. Under 45 minutes. Let's say that. Let's get into it. We're gonna do this and go into the story. The London Beer Flood, the Great London Beer Flood, was an accident at Moo and Company's. It's MEUX. And I've looked at it as, I've heard people say Mo, I've heard people say Moo, and I've heard the French go Meh. At Meh and Company's Horseshoe Brewery in London on the 17th of October, 1814. It took place when one of the 22-foot tall wooden vats of fermented porter burst. The escaping liquid dislodged the valve of another vessel and destroyed several large barrels between 128,000 and 323,000 imperial gallons, which turns out to be 580,000 to 1,470,000 liters, or for us Americans, 154,000 to 388,000 US gallons of beer was released in total into a neighborhood. The resulting wave of porter destroyed the back wall of the brewery and swept into an area of slum dwellings known as the St. Giles Rookery. 8 people were killed, 5 of them mourners at the wake, being held by an Irish family for a 2-year-old boy. The coroner's inquest returned a verdict that the 8 had lost their lives, and I'll get into that. I won't say what they said there. This is just a summary. The brewery was, investigated, and we'll get into that. And let's get into the actual story. So that's just an overview. So lots of beer, flows down the street, kills a bunch of people. Fucking bananas. In the early 19th century, the Meux brewery was one of the two largest in London, along with Whitbread. In 1809, Sir Henry Meux purchased the Horseshoe Brewery. And I'm going to say Meux because that's, from what I understand, his name was Meux. At the junction of Tottenham Court Road and Oxford Street. Meux's father, Sir Richard Meux, had previously co-owned the Griffin Brewery in Liquor Pond Street, now Clerkenwell Road, which we all know of, in which he had constructed the largest vat in London, capable of holding 20,000 imperial barrels. That's a lot of fucking booze. Henry emulated his father's large vat and constructed a wooden vessel 22 feet high, tall, and capable of holding 18,000 imperial barrels. 80 long tons of iron hoops were used to strengthen the vat. Meux brewed only porter, which, as you know, is a dark beer that was first brewed in London and was, at the time, the most popular drink in the capital. Meux and Company brewed 102,493 imperial barrels in the 12 months up to July of 1812. Porter was left in the large vessels to mature for several months or up into a year for the best quality versions. So, it's just like everything else. They just age it, and the ones that evaporate more and condense more are the most expensive because they're the most flavorful, and I can't imagine it would be more alcoholic, but maybe, I don't know. I would assume so. At the rear end of the brewery ran New Street, a small cul-de-sac that joined on Diot Street. This was within the St. Giles Rookery. The rookery, which covered an area of 8 acres, was, quote, a perpetually decaying slum, seemingly always on the verge of social and economic collapse, according to Richard Kirkland, the professor of Irish literature. Thomas Beams, the preacher of the Westminster St. James and author of the 1852 work, The Rookeries of London, Past, Present, and Prospective. By the way, a rookery is a slum. That was what they called it back then. It's a ghetto, a slum, a place where they basically walled off the poor and put them there to just rot and tried to keep them there with little chance of getting out to be among the proper people of London. You know what I'm saying? So he described, Thomas Beams described the St. Giles Rookery as, quote, a rendezvous of the scum of society. And the area had actually been the inspiration for William Hogarth's 1951 print, Gin Lane. And let's go into that for a second. If you don't remember Gin Lane, we've talked about it in previous episodes, probably about, I think, in the gin episode. But so he did 2 prints, both intaglio prints. If you don't know what that is, it's basically where you cut into metal and then you print the stuff around the metal. So on the left side of the print is Beer Street, and it's, a corner of London. Everyone looks relatively prosperous. There are people being moved around in rickshaws. There's construction going on. There are people drinking beer, like on the tops of roofs, taking a break from their work. There's a guy painting a sign that says, health to the barley mow, which I don't know what that is. There's like literally a dude with a big long pipe and a giant stein holding, which looks like a hind leg of an animal, like a ham. And he's clearly like taking a lunch. There's like a dude trying to make out with a woman. They're having fun. People are fat, happy, lots of fish, lots of food. There is a pawn shop, but the pawn shop looks like he's giving out beers. I don't know. There's a dude that's got books of health. You know, they talk about labor and art upheld by thee, successful advance. We quaff balmy juice with glee and water to leave the France. You know, that kind of shit. Little poems at the bottom. Beer happy produced from our isle can sinewy strength impart, and wearied with fatigue and toil can cheer each manly heart. Genius of health and grateful taste, rivals of cup of love, and warms each English generous breast with liberty and love. Oh, I'm sorry, rivals of the cup of Jove. Or no, cup of Jove, because it doesn't look like love. And then, okay, we go, that's, you know, everybody's cool and drinking their beer and having fun on the left side. And then on the right side is Gin Lane. And it's a different part of the city, and it's a slum, it's a rookery. And basically you can see where in the background, the city of London proper kind of is. And then everything that's all the way in the background. And in the foreground, in the middle ground, you see like a building falling over, basically in the middle, falling over. The bricks are falling out. You know, the walls are falling down. It looks like a bomb area. People are putting a dead woman into a casket. Next to the casket is like a baby drinking a fucking glass of gin. One dude has a child on a spike and he's just walking around. There's people blindly smashing each other with stools. Like literally they're blindfolded and they have like crutches. There's a distillery that's very popular. People are clamoring to get to the beer. This one also has a pawn shop, but instead of the pawn shop owner giving out drinks, he's buying up all of the stolen shit that the gin drinkers are bringing to him. There's a man eating a bone with a dog. kind of you know, he's got it with his hand, and then he's gnawing on one end of the bone and the dog's chewing on the other one. There's a lady with her titties out, just drunk as shit, looking like I guess she's grabbing some snuff while her child is falling over a railing, half naked and just all fucked up. And then there's a dude who looks like basically a skeleton who's basically drank himself to death next to a dog. He's real fucked up. And then the stuff under that reads, Gin cursed fiend with fury fraught, makes human race a prey. It enters a deadly drought and steals our life away. Virtue and truth, driven to despair, its rage compels to fly, but cherishes with hellish care murder, theft, perjury. Damned cup that on vitals prey, that liquid fire contains, which madness to the heart conveys, and rolls it through the veins. Yeah. So that's what people thought of rookeries back then, and how much they thought of the people, that they just thought they were just fucking. Oh, by the way, there's also a dude that hung himself in one of the buildings. I missed him the whole time. Nice shading. But that's what, you know, the general public and people of learned institutes thought of people that were poor. There's also a lady who's just dumping a whole glass of gin into a baby's mouth. That's nice, lady. So yeah, I would recommend looking up Beer Street and Gin Lane by what's his balls? William Hogarth's 1751 print, Gin Lane. So back to the story. So at around 4:30 in the afternoon of 17th of October, 1814, George Crick, Moe's storehouse clerk, saw that one of the 700-pound iron bands around the vat had slipped. So, you know how like a wooden cask isn't like straight up and down, it barrels out, and then it has bindings around it. Well, it had fallen down, which, 700 pounds, it's not easy to pop back on, but, the 22-foot tall vessel was filled within 4 inches of the top with 3,555 imperial barrels of 10-month-old porter. So as the bands had slipped off 2 or 3 times a year, Crick was unconcerned. This it's just one of those things. The wood shrinks over time. It expands and contracts, depending on how much liquid is in there. But, with it being filled to almost 4 inches at the top, you would think the wood would be pretty swollen, but I don't know. So he was pretty just nonplussed. He was just like, whatever. So he told a supervisor about the problem, but was told that, quote, that no harm would ensue. And so Crick was told to write a note to Mr. Young, one of the partners of the brewery, to have it fixed later. An hour after the hoop fell off, Crick was standing on a platform 30 feet from the vat, holding the note to Mr. Young when the vessel, with no indication, burst. The force of the liquid's release knocked the stopcock from a neighboring vat. Stopcock, by the way, is what people say to me after I've been drinking. But actually, a stopcock is it's the plug that has this, the knob that you can turn to let things out at the bottom of a barrel. But like a big one. So the force of the liquid release knocked the stopcock from a neighboring vat, which also began discharging its contents. Several hogsheads of porter were destroyed. Those are big barrels as well. And their contents added to the flood. So between 128,000 and 323,000 imperial gallons were released. That's a rough estimate, and it's probably somewhere in the middle, but still a lot of fucking beer. The force of the liquid destroyed the rear wall of the brewery. It was 25 feet high and 2.5 bricks thick. I don't know what that means. Some of the bricks from the back of the the wall was 20 feet high and 2.5 bricks thick. Sorry, I thought that was the wave for a second. Some of the bricks from the back were knocked upwards and fell into the roofs of the houses nearby. Here we go. The wave of the porter, some 15 feet high, swept into New Street, where it destroyed 2 houses and badly damaged 2 others. It is basically a beer tsunami. In one of the houses, a 4-year-old girl, Hannah Bamfield, was having tea with her mother and another child. The wave of beer swept the mother and the second child into the street. Hannah was killed. In a second house, a wake was being held by an Irish family for a 2-year-old boy. Anne Saville, the boy's mother, and 4 other mourners, Mary Mulvey and her 3-year-old son, Elizabeth Smith and Catherine Butler, were killed. Eleanor Cooper, a 14-year-old servant of the publican of the Tavistock Arms in Great Russell Street, died when she was buried under the brewery's collapsed wall while she was washing pots in the pub's backyard. Another child, Sarah Bates, was found dead in another house in New Street. The land around the building was low-lying and flat. With insufficient drainage, the beer flowed into cellars, many of which were inhabited, and people were forced to climb on furniture to avoid drowning. A lot of people, they didn't have full houses. They just lived either on floors. So if a lot of people lived in cellars, those were the cheapest places. So yeah, that just instant, there's no drainage. Where's it all going to go? All those in the brewery survived, although 3 workmen had to be rescued from the rubble. The superintendent and one of the workers were taken to Middlesex Hospital along with 3 others. Okay, so after the incident, stories later arose of hundreds of people collecting the beer. Mass drunkenness and death from alcohol poisoning a few days later. This is hearsay, and nobody's... that some of this came out in, sensationalist papers. Some used it as a, like, see what these people do, like that kind of thing. And I'm sure some people did it, but I think from the other things that I've read, this was blown out of proportion and used as a sort of Fox News smear against poor people. Um, the brewing historian Martin Cornell states that the newspapers at the time made no reference to the revelry or of the later deaths. Instead, the newspapers reported that the crowds were well behaved. Cornell points out that the popular press of the time did not like the immigrant Irish population that lived in St. Giles. So if there had been any misbehavior, it would have been reported by the regular sort of press. But it was these stories were put out in some of the more dubious papers. The area surrounding the rear of the brewery showcased a quote unquote scene of desolation that presents the most awful and terrific appearance, equal to that which fire or earthquake may be supposed to occasion, unquote. Watchmen at the brewery charged people to view the remains of the destroyed beer vats and the street and the, like to get in to take a looky-loo. The mourners killed in the cellar were given their own wakes at the Ship Public House in Bainbridge Street. The other bodies were laid out in nearby yards by their families. The public came to see them and donated money to their funerals. Collections were taken up more widely for the families. Also, I had read that the cops and the watchmen that were charging people, they were charging them like a penny to come and see everything. They had taken the money that they collected and put it towards the burials for the people as well, which I hope is real. The coroner's inquest was held at the workhouse of the St. Giles Parish on 19 October 1814. George Hodson, the coroner from Middlesex, oversaw proceedings. The details of the victims were read out. These were the dead: Eleanor Cooper, age 14; Mary Mulvey, age 30; Thomas Murray, age 3; Hannah Bamfield, age 4 years, 4 months; Sarah Bates, age 3 years, 5 months; Anne Saville, age 60; Elizabeth Smith, age 27; and Catherine Butler, age 65. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of them were under the age of 15. There was a 30-year-old and a 27-year-old, 2 60-year-olds. Like, that's brutal. Hodgkin took the jurors to the scene of the events, and they viewed the brewery and bodies before evidence was taken from the witnesses. The first witness was George Crick, who had seen the whole event happen. His brother was one of the men who had been injured at the brewery. Crick said that the hoops on the vat failed 3 or 4 times a year, but without any previous problems. Accounts were also heard from Richard Hawes, the landlord of the Tavistock Arms, whose barmaid had been killed in the accident, and along with several others gave their testimony. The jury returned with a verdict that the 8 had lost their lives, quote, casually, accidentally, and by misfortune. So nothing happened. As the coroner's request reached a verdict of an act of God, Moo and company did not have to pay compensation. Nevertheless, the disaster, the lost porter, the damage to the building, and the replacement of the vat cost the company £23,000, which would be 1.2 million pounds today. And after a private petition to Parliament, they recovered about £7,250, which is about 400,000 pounds today, on the taxes that they would have paid on that, saving them from bankruptcy. So good for them. Good for them. Much like the Great Molasses Flood of 1919 in Boston, which we've covered in the past, but I think I would like to go into like deeper like this. This event sort of just faded from everyone's minds over time. There was a place in recent years called the Holborn Whippet, which was a local pub in the area of the flood that used to do a anniversary ale each year to help commemorate the event, but they've gone out of business. So like, I'm sure it's a very, very super hyper local story around the neighborhood. And who knows now, like the neighborhood's changed so much. It's probably, I mean, I know what goes there now. We'll get into that, but like, it's not commemorated or, thought about anymore as a story. As a result of the accident, large wooden tanks were phased out across the brewing industry and replaced with lined concrete vessels, which sounds gross. So after the disaster, the Horseshoe Brewery went back in business as soon as possible in 1814. After the disaster, the brewery continued to be one of the largest producers of porter in London throughout the 19th century. Henry Meux was created a baronet in 1831, and on his death in 1841, his son Henry took over, who was also Henry. Production of ale began in 1872. Meux employed 3 partners to manage the brewery: Richard Bainbridge, Dudley Coates Marjoribanks, and William Arabin. In 1878, Henry Bruce Meux, later the 3rd baronet, and Marjorie Banks, later Lord Tweedmouth, took over management of the company, which they renamed Meux Brewing Company Limited when they registered it as a public company in 1888. When Henry Meux died childless in 1900 and his American wife, Valerie, Lady Meux, inherited his share of the brewery, she took a liking to Admiral Hedworth Lambton, and he received a large share of her Horseshoe Brewery when she died in 1910, on the condition that he changed his name to Meux, which he did. So then he became Admiral Meux. The Horseshoe Brewery closed in 1921 because he was probably a bad businessman. He was an admiral. He sails the seas. He doesn't fucking know how to sell beer. He knows how to drink beer. He's a pirate. By this time, the site had covered 103,000 square feet. By the way, it was moved. It closed in that spot. 103,000 square feet, but there was no available land to expand. So production was transferred to the Thorns Brothers Nine Elms Brewery in Wandsworth, which the company had bought in 1914. The Nine Elms Brewery was renamed the Horseshoe Brewery. The original Horseshoe Brewery was demolished in 1922, and in 1928 and 29, the Dominion Theater was erected on the site. In 1956, Meux merged with Friary, Holroyd, and Healy of Guildford to form Friary Meux, which went into liquidation in 1961. And the company was acquired by Allied Breweries in 1964. The Horseshoe Brewery ceased to brew in 1966. Friary Meux was revived by Ally in 1979 as a brand name for its public houses, but disappeared after Allied's pubs were sold to Punch Taverns in 1999. The former brewery tap is now a branch of Halifax Bank. But there are still traces of the Meux brand in London, notable until the demolition of the building in 2015 was the original Meux Original House London Stout. Logo on the side of a derelict public house, and thus runs the death of that brewery. Good riddance. So the social pack is the impact of the whole story is basically one of just greed, indifference, probably bribery, and just kind of carelessness of the industrial age and how people, even back then, took businesses over lives. So it wasn't until the late 1800s, starting with the Health and Safety Post of 1867 and the early 1900s, that Serious Protection Acts for the workers was enacted in England. So there you have it. The Great Beer Flood of London. It's a terrible story. It changed some things. It changed a lot of people's opinions on, it started the ball rolling for worker safety, I think, especially with where they were kind of really closing off slums But a lot of that really honestly didn't make a shit difference until after London was bombed to fucking rubble and they had to rethink of remaking the whole country pretty much. So yeah, it's not a feel good story, but it's fucking crazy, just thinking of just the way things are built today and how that would probably not happen just because we have gutters and sewers. And just how terrifying. Oh, by the way, one of the things that they didn't cover in here that I read in a couple other things that the beer didn't go away because there was no where to put it. So basically for like a couple years, that section of London just smelled like bad beer. So that's nice, right? So there you have it. Fun, right? But it happened, and it's fascinating. It's really fucked up and weird, and I hope you enjoyed listening to it. I enjoyed researching it and reading about it, and I hope everyone involved that was on the bad side of it had found peace, and all the myths involved got genital warts. So thank you for listening to the Rude Cooking School podcast. We do this every week, so we will see you next week. And in the meantime, check out our Facebook page, join it. It's a lot of fun. Wherever you're listening to this podcast right now, rate and review or follow us. It really does make a big difference. It draws a lot of eyes to or ears to the podcast. And we really appreciate when you do it, or tell a friend who tells a friend who tells a friend who tells a friend. So for the Rude Cooking School podcast, my name's John Hauser III. Don't yuck my yum. See you next week. Peace.